Barry Minkow, by the age of 15, had already started his very own carpet cleaning business, and by his early 20s, that company was worth upwards of $300 million. Except it was a giant Ponzi scheme, and after he got caught for this scam, he ran another giant scam posing as the pastor of a church. If Barry Minkow's life story sounds more like a Hollywood movie, that's because it is. Minkow's very true story was dramatized in the 2018 crime thriller Con Man, which centered around Minkow's various exploits as a scheming businessman. Before we dive into the juicy twists and turns, let's take a look back at his upbringing to better understand how he became the infamous con man he is today. Barry had always been a hustler, even as a young boy in the 1970s in Los Angeles. The importance of a strong work ethic was instilled in him throughout his childhood. His drive to work hard and make a better life for himself and his family became a recurring theme that characterized his later years. He got his first job at the ripe old age of 9, when his mother got him a telemarketing gig at the carpet cleaning company she worked for. It wasn't anything more than an easy summer job, but Barry was still just 9 years old at the time, so the fact that he had any type of employment at all was rather remarkable. While most of his classmates were playing with their toys, Barry was out there making cold calls for his mother's employer. Barry refined his skills as a salesman in his teenage years. With his growing work experience came increased dissatisfaction with his family's low-class way of living. The Minkows were, by all accounts, quite poor. They often struggled to pay the bills, and Barry's parents had to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Barry was embarrassed by his family's lack of wealth, and he dreamed of making enough money to change their fortunes. That's why, as a sophomore in high school, he took the giant leap into the world of entrepreneurship and started a rug cleaning business of his own called ZZZZ. Nearly 150 competing firms populated the LA carpet cleaning scene, none of which had gained a significant leg up on the rest. Barry had become quite familiar with the ins and outs of the carpet cleaning business over the last few years, and he was confident he could make ZZZZ a household name. With the $6,000 he had saved up working nights and summers for his mother's company, he officially launched ZZZZ at 15 years old. He wasn't even able to drive a car yet, but he was now the owner of his very own company. The operation was modest. He and 3 other employees set up shop in his parents' garage and used the 4 phones they had at their disposal to start calling potential clients. Minkow sought to differentiate ZZZZ from other carpet cleaning companies in the area who would often obtain business through a deceptive bait and switch that promised customers better rates than what were actually charged for. People were wary of this common industry practice at this point, so Minkow knew he had to be different to get ahead. He offered his clients 2-room cleanings for just $40, a seemingly fair deal that resulted in very few customer complaints at first. But Barry struggled to keep ZZZZ afloat during these early years, and his inexperience as a business owner became apparent. His clients complained about ZZZZ's work quality and accused Barry of upcharging them after the fact. His troubles did not stop there. While many applauded him for starting his own business, banks were not so impressed with the teen. 2 different banks shut down Barry's business accounts because he was still a minor, and the carpet suppliers he was doing business with grew tired of the teenager's late payments. He was forced to rely on cash transactions rather than using credit cards, a necessity during his early years that later made his illicit dealings easier to conceal from authorities. His dream of starting a successful business and lifting his family from the depths of poverty was beginning to fade. Desperate, Barry engaged in some ethically questionable behavior to bring in enough cash to keep the lights on. He started kiting checks, which is a complicated process of continuously writing checks from different bank accounts. Simply put, a check kiter will write a check from one bank account for more money than is actually in that account. They'll then deposit that check into another account and then withdraw the cash for instant money. The kiter then uses that instant cash to pay off a debt or leaves it in the account to fool an auditor. With modern banking and technology, check kiting is borderline impossible. But back in the early 80s, it could take days, maybe weeks, before the bank noticed the massive account overdraft. If that makes your head spin, then you understand why it can be difficult for banks back then to detect kiters like Minkow. In addition to kiting checks, Barry also sold some of his grandmother's jewelry behind her back and even staged break-ins at the ZZZZ office to recoup insurance funds. He had no problem twisting the rules to keep his dream alive. And these youthful examples of delinquency and deception were only the beginning of Minkow's descent into a life of crime. It's at this point that Barry's story gets a little more nefarious. Small-time scams turned into a full-on Ponzi scheme once he got involved with an insurance claims adjuster named Tom Paget. When parents warn their children of potential bad influences, they're usually talking about high school bullies and dropouts, not crooked insurance claims adjusters. But like everything else in Minkow's life up to this point, he was operating far beyond his years. With Paget's assistance, Barry forged several fraudulent documents that falsely claimed Z-Best worked alongside Paget's firm on various restoration projects across Southern California. The pair even created a fake company called Interstate Appraisal Services to help legitimize these phony restorations. Interstate, which was actually just Barry himself, would appraise the details of their non-existent restoration projects and give banks the impression that everything was on the up and up. In reality, it was all a ruse. But thanks to Minkow and Paget's carefully spun web of lies and fake companies, prospective lenders were none the wiser. Z-Best's new restoration division brought in bundles of cash in the form of bank loans. With his newfound financial stability, Barry was able to expand his company into multiple locations across the state of California. Z-Best wasn't a complete and total sham. It was still a functioning carpet cleaning business garnering positive reviews and feedback from its customers. Unbeknownst to their clients and the banks that continued to fund their operations, the vast majority of Z-Best's money was coming from their fake insurance restoration projects. Roughly 86% of the company's revenue came from these non-existent restorations, or rather, the bank loans they received for them. Barry would subsequently use new loans to pay back old loans, and the Ponzi cycle continued. He also kept up his check-kiting scam to secure more fraudulent funding for his growing carpet cleaning business. He even masterminded a $70,000 credit card fraud that wrongly charged multiple Z-Best customers. He was able to wiggle his way out of that one by blaming it on rogue employees who had supposedly been fired. He then paid back all of his angry clients, all except for one, a homemaker who lost a few $100s to Barry's scam. It seemed like the problem had been dealt with though, so Barry moved on. Although he was still just a high school student, he was successfully operating a high-level Ponzi scheme from his parents' garage, and the scamming was only just beginning. Barry graduated in 1985 and focused all of his efforts on Z-Best and the various scams he was involved in. Things got even more precarious after Barry accepted a loan from a man named Jack Catton Jr. Despite his rampant scams, he was still strapped for cash and needed some help. Catton wasn't your average everyday investor, though. By 1985, he was infamous among LAPD circles for his involvement in organized crime, not only in Los Angeles, but also in Chicago and Philadelphia. While Minkow later said he was unaware of Catton's ties to the mafia, he didn't actually end his association with the mobster once his criminal background came to light. It's become obvious at this point that Minkow's moral compass doesn't exactly point north. If someone offers him money, he's going to take it. That's exactly what he did when Catton arrived with cash to bankroll Z-Best's operation. The two apparently agreed on a deal that awarded Jack Catton 50% of the company's profits in exchange for the loans he supplied. The partnership didn't last long before it abruptly imploded. Catton claimed that Minkow was not giving him his agreed-upon share of the money, while Minkow asserted that his mobster friend was unreasonably increasing the interest rates on his loans. The pair brought their grievances to court, but Catton passed away before any resolution was reached. Minkow has taken his first step into the world of organized crime, and you know what they say, once you're in for life. Other corrupt individuals came knocking once Minkow got in bed with the mob. Much to the dismay of Z-Best's law-abiding employees, convicted felons turned into trusted advisors when Minkow solicited the help of guys like Maurice Rind and Robert Viggiano. Rind was one of the company's biggest shareholders, but was also convicted of securities fraud a decade prior. Viggiano was a convicted jewel thief who served as a close business partner to Minkow. Although he was swimming with the sharks, Barry lived like a rock star. He splurged on over-the-top luxuries he only ever dreamed of as a kid. He treated himself to a massive Mediterranean-style mansion in a gated Woodland Hills community that cost him nearly $700,000. He was definitely the only 19-year-old homeowner in the neighborhood. He traded in his parents' garage for one that fit his two new luxury cars, a white BMW and a red 1985 Ferrari, which sported Z-Best on the license plate. They went nicely with his girlfriend's black Porsche, which he bought her for her 19th birthday. Barry walked around with a gold ring on his finger and gold chains around his neck. He had officially escaped his previous life and was finally leading the kind of high-flying existence he had been working towards since 9 years old. It was 10 years of hard work and endless hustling in the making, but for sure, he'd tell you it was all worth it. It was around this time that Minkow decided to take Z-Best public. In 1986, they got a spot on the NASDAQ after the auditor that verified them neglected to visit the fraudulent restoration sites they listed on their books. If they'd done their due diligence, they would have realized that the majority of Z-Best's business wasn't real, and the jig would have been up right there and then. Why the auditor didn't think it was important to visit the sites, we'll never know. Perhaps a few persuasive mafia members had something to do with it? Luckily for Minkow and the company, that never happened. Once they went public, Minkow became a millionaire. He retained 53% of the company, keeping a controlling stake despite his new investors. Not only did going public make Minkow a very, very rich 20-year-old, it also gave him a potential out from the criminal doings he was caught up in. His plan, or so he says, was to sell his shares after retaining them for the mandatory 2 years required by U.S. securities law. At that point, he believed he would have the requisite funds to pay off all of his loans and make Z-Best a legitimate business. Before that could happen, Minkow agreed to undergo an initial public offering, or IPO, of Z-Best stock to officially go public. For an IPO to take place, a company needs to be audited by an independent accountant. This presented a problem, as much of Z-Best's operations were fraudulent. To conceal this from the accountants tasked with inspecting his business, Minkow went to tremendous lengths of theater and deception. He picked out a brand new office building in Sacramento that had absolutely no affiliation with Minkow or his company and brought the auditors inside, claiming it had been one of Z-Best's recent restoration jobs. He even paid off the building's security guard to take part in the charade. They forged thousands and thousands of phony financial documents to keep the accountants fooled. And for a while, it worked. At 21 years old, Minkow became the youngest person in American history to successfully lead a company through an IPO. The future of Z-Best was looking very bright indeed, and Minkow was quickly becoming one of the hottest names in the business world. In 1987, at the height of Z-Best's rise, the company's net worth was $280 million, trading on the NASDAQ at $18 a share. Barry's personal stock was worth about $100 million on its own. The company employed over 1,000 people who worked at offices in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Despite his company's outstanding growth and success, Minkow was still struggling to pay back some of the loans he had taken for his fake restorations. While he and his business were worth a lot of money, he didn't have a lot of cash flow available to pay their expenses, and he couldn't sell his shares until the mandated 2-year period was over. He came up with a master plan to solve this problem. A massive merger with a company called KeyServe was put into motion. KeyServe, which was twice the size of Z-Best, was the official carpet cleaner for Sears. Minkow planned to buy the company outright for $25 million, absorbing all of their assets and all of their cash. He believed that KeyServe's revenue would total more than enough to pay off the loans and legitimize Z-Best even sooner than was originally planned. KeyServe wasn't the only target of Minkow's aggressive strategy. He also set his sights on ServiceMaster, which he intended to acquire through a hostile takeover that would cost between $700 and $800 million. Minkow still wasn't done. A deal to purchase the Seattle Mariners Major League Baseball team was also in the works. This was all done in the hopes that Minkow would finally have the capital necessary to end his Ponzi scheme before it was too late. Unfortunately for Minkow, it was too late before it even began. The event that ultimately toppled his house of cards had occurred years prior, before Barry even considered taking Z-Best public. Remember that homemaker that Minkow scammed a couple $100s from? Well, believe it or not, that disgruntled individual was the key in exposing all of Barry's criminal schemes. Days before the merger with KeyServe was finalized, the LA Times published a story detailing the homemaker's experience with Z-Best's credit card scam. She spoke with many other people who'd been defrauded by Minkow, documenting her findings in a journal sent to the newspaper. Barry had assumed the homemaker wouldn't cry over spilled milk and just opted to ignore her. Nonetheless, those few $100s were enough for her to spring into action, and her initiative proved to be Minkow's undoing. As a result of the shocking LA Times expose, everything Minkow had achieved came crashing down in one fell swoop. Z-Best stock price plummeted 28% overnight. Duped lenders lined up to demand their money back. Investigations were launched into the company's various operations. In June of 1987, an independent law firm was brought in to closely inspect Z-Best's supposed restoration projects. Not even a week later, Minkow resigned from his post as president and chairman of the company, citing unknown health problems as the reason behind his departure. Nobody was fooled. He left because he knew his schemes were about to be found out, and he didn't want to be anywhere near Z-Best when that happened. Once Barry resigned, a new board was formed to conduct a thorough thorough internal investigation. This investigation quickly uncovered the rampant fraud that Barry had taken part in for years as the head man at ZBest. Just days after his resignation, the company sued Barry, claiming he had fled with $23 million of the company's money, which forced them to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The LAPD raided the ZBest office and Minkow's house as well. In addition to the elaborate Ponzi scheme, authorities also found evidence that the mob had utilized ZBest as a money laundering front. This came as an ironic shock to many, as Barry Minkow had long been quite vocal in his opposition to the widespread drug use of the 80s. He had always forbidden the use of drugs by ZBest employees, even going so far as to put up anti-drug posters around the company. Perhaps he was just trying to throw people off the scent of his ties to organized crime. Maybe he felt guilty about his secret association with drug money. Whatever the reason for his particular aversion to drugs, it was all a lie, like everything else in his life. As you probably guessed, Minkow was hit with heavy charges after his schemes were found out. He was indicted on 54 counts of racketeering, security fraud, bank fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and embezzlement. That pretty much covers it all, right? Minkow tried to portray himself as the victim during the court proceedings, claiming that he was pressured into turning ZBest into a Ponzi scheme by mobsters who were secretly pulling the strings. Years later, even Minkow himself admitted this was actually false and that he was the true mastermind behind the fraud. The jury saw through his lies, and in March of 1989, Barry Minkow was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. In addition to the hefty jail time, Minkow was placed on 5 years probation in order to pay $26 million in restitution for the victims of his financial crimes. He pleaded for a lighter sentence, which the judge simply laughed at. The SEC banned him from serving as the director of a public company ever again. A teenager had turned his modest carpet cleaning business into a publicly traded, multi-million-dollar company in a matter of years. In a matter of days, it was all taken away. While serving his sentence, Minkow turned over a new leaf. He became a devout Christian, taking part in the prison ministry and seemingly repenting of his past sins. His new lease on life got him an early release just 7.5 years into his prison stay. He was committed to finally doing something positive with his life, but unfortunately, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. As we'll explore in the next video, that dog got back to his old tricks in a hurry. Barry Minkow's schemes had only just begun. Click here to watch one of these next videos.